My God, if you want, is freedom. The freedom of human beings, of individuals, to pursue their own values. A favorite device to stir our emotions is to contrast extremes of wealth and of poverty. We are expected to conclude that the rich are responsible for the deprivations of the poor. That they are rich at the expense of the poor. Whether it is in the slums of New Delhi or in the affluence of Las Vegas, it simply isn't fair that there should be any losers. Life is unfair. There's nothing fair about one man being born blind and another man being born with sight. There's nothing fair about one man being born of a wealthy parent and one of an impecunious parent. There's nothing fair about Muhammad Ali having been born with a skill that enables him to make millions of dollars one night. There's nothing fair about Marlene Dietrich having great legs that we all want to watch. There's nothing fair about any of that. But on the other hand, don't you think a lot of people who like to look at Marlene Dietrich's legs benefited from nature's unfairness in producing a Marlene Dietrich? What kind of a world would it be if everybody was an absolute identical duplicate of anybody else? You might as well destroy the whole world and just keep one specimen left for a museum. During the 19th century, and especially after the Civil War and on into the 20th century, the idea of equality came to have a much more definite and specific meaning than the abstract concept of equality before God. It came more and more to mean that everyone should have the same opportunity to make what he could of his capacities. That all careers should be open to people on the basis of their talents, independently of the race or religion or belief or social class that characterized them. This concept of equality of opportunity offers no conflict at all with the concept of freedom. On the contrary, they reinforce one another, and it is no doubt the concept that even today is most widely held. But in the 20th century, beginning especially abroad, and at a later date in this country, a very different concept, a very different ideal has begun to emerge. That is the ideal that everyone should be equal in income, in level of living, in what he has. The idea that the economic race should be so arranged that everybody ends at the finish line at the same time, rather than that everyone starts at the beginning line at the same time. This concept raises a very serious problem for freedom. It is clearly in conflict with it, since it requires that the freedom of some be restricted in order to provide greater benefits to others.
Mr. Friedman is right that all over the world people are beginning to stir and are striving for a measure of equality, for a measure of justice. But I think he demeans and trivializes those struggles when he tells us all that we can't all have Marlene Dietrich's legs. Moreover, he confuses us by using the term freedom. I think what Mr. Friedman means by the term freedom is economic license. And economic license, the economic license of those who control property and those who control capital has in fact been a threat not only to equality, but a threat to the freedom of peoples all over the world, and not only in Europe and in the United States, but in Africa, in Asia, and in Latin America.
Let me get two other reactions now to that idea, that this new ideal of equality, equality in this world's goods, represents a very serious threat to freedom. Peter J.
I think that your question brings up what is to me the absolutely central confusion in the exposition that we saw in the film. And I'm a great admirer of Professor Friedman. I've studied him, I've listened to him, I've debated with him, and always before I found him at least clear, even when he's been wrong. Today I found him grossly confused, and in this specific and all-important respect. Is he telling us that absolute equality is a mistaken objective? In which case I think he's tilting at windmills, he is attacking a straw man. There is almost nobody on the other side of that argument. Or is he saying that any concern at all by societies and governments with reducing inequality is mistaken, is not only in conflict with freedom and efficiency and other human objectives, but is absolutely wrong? In which case, I think he's talking absolute nonsense. His arguments tend to support the first, rather platitudinous proposition that absolute equality is still less absolute sameness is a foolish and exaggerated objective. His arguments do not at all support the second claim, that it is wrong to concern oneself with distribution of income and wealth and reducing inequality at all.
The question is not absolute equality. It's a question of what concept of equality you're aiming at, whether you're getting it absolutely or to one degree or the other. Are you aiming at a concept of equality of opportunity at the outset, or are you aiming at a concept of equality of results? It's also not a question of whether it's material goods only. Whether it's material goods, status, or whatnot, again, the same question comes back. Are you thinking about equality of opportunity, prospective equality, or are you thinking about retrospective results at the finish line? And I think that's the crucial distinction.
What I mean by equality is the concept I would like to see pursued is a concept that Tom Sowell just discussed of equality of opportunity. The concept that increasingly is being taken up by the intellectual community is equality of results. See, the fundamental distinction between you and me on this, I believe, is a very different one. I think there's all the difference in the world between a social or governmental system in which 90% of the people tax themselves to help 10% who are in distress, and a system in which 80% of the people in the middle try to tax the 10% on the top in order to help the 10% at the bottom. What you end up doing is you end up, Mr. A and B in the ancient story of the forgotten man, you end up with A and B imposing taxes on C to help D, and some of it, after all, in the process,
Milton,
gets in the hands of A and B.
You're dodging the fundamental issue which was brought up by Tom Sowell. Are you saying to us that the only form of equality that one's entitled as a society, in your view, to be concerned with is equality of opportunity, and any concern with inequalities of result is illegitimate, that any inequality, however great, provided it's thrown up by a free market system and not by a caste system or a feudal system of which kind you disapprove, that any concern with that is wrong? Are you saying that, or aren't you saying it? Because it's all important.
Concern with whom? By whom?
Concern by the society.
The society doesn't have concerns.
It has governments, it has laws, it has parliaments.
Only people have concerns. People do certain things through government. And I'm not going to talk about society having values. Society doesn't have values. People have values.
All right. Is it wrong for people to be concerned about inequality?
It is not wrong for individuals in their private capacity to be concerned. Anybody who is really concerned can do something about it on his own.
Is it wrong for them to elect governments which do something about it? You yourself
It's not wrong for them to elect.
You yourself have supported a negative income tax, which is a way of doing something about inequality.
It's not wrong for us to do something through government about distress.
Yeah.
But there's a fundamental distinction between relieving distress and doing something about inequality. I see no justification whatsoever for cutting down all the tall trees in order that there be no tree in the forest that is taller than the other.
When you say that it is wrong for government to intervene in the free enterprise system to do something about inequality, you evoke a model of a free enterprise system which does not exist and has never existed to a significant extent in history or anywhere in the world. That so-called free enterprise system has always used government. The entrepreneurs of that free enterprise system have always used government, and the question that you raise is whether other people can use government to achieve their ends. The free enterprise system, as it is spread around the world, as it is spread to Asia and Africa and Latin America, has spread through the force of arms, among other things, and those arms were wielded by governments. That was government intervention under the name of the free enterprise system, but a government intervention which destroyed the freedoms of many people, not least of which are the people of Chile.
I agree with you that everything called free enterprise is not free enterprise. I agree with you that many things have been done under the name of free enterprise that are not consistent with free enterprise. I agree with you, and we stress over and over again in this series, that whenever businessmen have the chance, they will, of course, use government to pursue objectives which may or may not be in the interest of the public at large. But you always are talking about mixed systems, and I challenge you to find a single example in history at any time of any society where people have been relatively free, and I don't mean merely what you call merely economic freedom. I mean freedom in the full sense. I mean freedom of individuals to pursue their own objectives, their own values, to live their lives. I want you to name me any society in which you've had any large measure of that freedom, where capitalism and free enterprise has not been the predominant mechanism for controlling economic activity. Not the sole mechanism, but the dominant one. I want you to name me one exception.
Your conception of freedom, does that apply in Chile today? Where the
Chile is not
system,
politically free. Chile today does not have political freedom, and I
yet
do
the
not
free
condone,
enterprise
but let
system-
me go on for a moment, if you will. You raise the question, let me answer it. Chile is not a politically free system, and I do not condone the political system. But the people there are freer than the people in communist societies because government plays a smaller role, because the free enterprise that has been emerging has been cutting down the fraction of the total income of the people spent by government, because unemployment has been going down, output has been going up, food production has been going up. The conditions of the people not for the first time, but in the past few years, has been getting better and not worse. They would be still better to get rid of the junta and to be able to have a free democratic system. What I have said, and what I repeat here, is that it's a necessary condition. You cannot have a free society, in my opinion, and I know no counterexample, and I challenge you to produce one.
It is perfectly reasonable for a society to say, or for people in a society to say, and together through their political process to express the thought, that there are many objectives that society has. Efficiency is one, prosperity is one, freedom is perhaps the most important of all, that concern about equality, or at least about reducing inequality, is another. And that we should ask ourselves the question, are all the inequalities that we face, the gross inequalities described in Dickens, the gross inequalities which you yourself reported in India, the gross inequalities which you yourself said in the film were offensive and were unfair, are all of these justified by the criteria of freedom and efficiency, or are some of them unnecessary? In other words, we take the principle that there should only be such inequality as is necessary and justified by one of the other criteria of a society. Now, if you're willing to say that, then you're not in disagreement with anybody. If you're denying that, you've made no arguments to support what you're saying.
Now, before we have Milton reply, we must bring in Thomas.
I think we're talking at cross purposes. On the one hand, we're talking about results that we're hoping for. On the other hand, we're talking about processes that we're setting in motion. You're saying, should we hope for certain kinds of lessening of inequality and so on? The real question, the political question is, shall we set in motion certain processes because we hope for that, and do those processes enhance or reduce freedom? And I think the argument that Milton is making, certainly the argument that I would make, is that the attempt at doing these things, and it doesn't really matter, it's a complete straw man to talk about absolute inequality.
Yes, it is. No. Absolutely. Throughout the film, this is the straw man he brings up in order to say how ridiculous to have absolute equality. And then he goes on to say how ridiculous to have absolute homogenization as well.
As a result, you see, that you set up processes whose end result may not be any more or less inequality than exists now, but the question is, those processes may indeed reduce freedom greatly. I would go beyond the question of equality and put it more generally, that any process to ascribe any status to any group of people, equality, inferiority, superiority, must necessarily reduce freedom, because whatever the government wishes to ascribe to any group, whatever place, to use the phrase that was very common in the South, that blacks should have their place, whatever place the government is going to assign to people, that place will not coincide, that place will not coincide either with what all those people are doing or with how others perceive all those people, because there's too much diversity among human beings. To maintain any system of ascribed status from the top is going to mean reducing people's freedom across the spectrum. That's the point.
The society that puts equality before freedom will end up with neither. The society that puts freedom before equality will end up with a great measure of both.